Alright, tonight's video covers the Great Depression. We're looking at life and society and what all went on, especially in the early years of the Depression. Okay, so we start with unemployment. Of course, the Great Depression is characterized by unemployment. What were its main causes and effects? Alright, so the causes of unemployment. Oddly enough, the stock market did not affect the majority of us as individuals. Only between 3 and 5% of individual Americans were invested in the stock market. The problems were the other entities that were invested in the stock market. The banks, especially. When we deposit money in a bank, we expect it to be safe. It draws interest, though. Banks pay us to keep our money there. The way they do that is they take our money and they invest it. And a lot of them invested that money in the stock market. So when the stock market crashed, the bank is who was losing the money. And that's what is going to affect us. It's going to be an indirect failure. Also, businesses had invested in the stock market. And businesses, when the economy starts to slow down, businesses cut orders. They're not producing as much because they don't have as many people ordering things. And so, since their profits go down, and even to the point of not just profits go down, but maybe all of a sudden they're actually losing money, they've got to figure out a way to cut costs. The easiest way to cut costs is to cut jobs. And so, employers cut jobs. You went to the bank. Well, your bank failed. If your bank failed, it went out of business. You don't have any savings. And so, you're unemployed and broke and possibly homeless. January of 1933, unemployment was at its highest during the Depression. It was at a high of 25%. That is 1 out of every 4 people in the United States actively looking for a job, and you are unable to find it. A huge number, horrible number. Now, because he's the president, people around the country blame Herbert Hoover for this. Okay. And we see our cartoon over here. The cartoonist is drawing kind of everybody, all different walks of society. Blame it on Hoover. If you look at the cartoon, though, look at what the artist is really trying to say. He's not saying, hey, we should blame Hoover. Look at how he's got Hoover. Hoover's at his desk. Hoover's working. Hoover's not golfing. He's not swimming. He's not having a good time. He's not ignoring the problem. He's hard at work. What the artist is saying here is, here we are, we're all blaming the guy that's trying to fix it. We need to maybe back off a little bit. Whatever, people blamed him anyway, and so they would immortalize him. And here we have one of the things that they named after him, the Hoovervilles. Hoovervilles were homeless camps. And if you're in Hooverville, you could curl up with a day-old blanket. That's a Hoover Blanket. That's a day-old newspaper. You could also, if you were hungry, you could feast on a Hoover hog, an armadillo, which I've heard is good eating. I'm never going to try to find out. Question 1. What was the Dust Bowl, and what were its causes? Okay, so in addition to just kind of the general unemployment Great Depression, you also have this farm crisis. Problems going on with farmers. Farmers went into the Depression starting in the early 1920s. They had been encouraged to grow more food for World War I, and we just weren't in World War I that long. And so they borrowed a bunch of money, bought new equipment, bought new fertilizers, bought more farmland, grew more food, overproduced, and what happened is the production of food actually increased faster than the population. When you have too much supply, not enough demand, it's going to cause lower prices. So farmers are growing more and getting less on the back end for what it is that they've tried to produce. This crisis continues through the 1920s. I've heard it described as farmers, some people did not even notice there was a Great Depression because their life was so bad beforehand, all they noticed was more people walking down the street. In addition to just kind of the general farm crisis, in the Midwest, there's this thing that happens called the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl lasts from 1932 to 1936, and it is this massive drought from the Dakotas all the way down into Texas. Okay? And you'll get maps that look a little bit different every once in a while, but everybody pretty much agrees that right here, in this area right here, Kansas, Oklahoma, the Panhandle, this is where it was worst. This is extreme drought. In some places for 4 years it did not rain. When that happens, you have massive dust storms. Part of the reason that the soil was kind of ripe for being blown off like this is because farmers had made their land unproductive. Those chemical fertilizers they'd been using actually killed off the productivity of the soil. So maybe if the amount of rain just goes down, maybe your crops can survive. But when the soil isn't able to support them, then they all die. When the wind blows, it picks up the topsoil that's not being held in place anymore. And you can see here what it did, how it piled it up, how it piled that dust up against houses. Here you see it blowing into a town in Kansas. And these massive dust storms raging across the United States. They don't stop in the 30s. Every once in a while another one will happen, and sometimes they make the news. You can get on YouTube and you can look some of these things up. One of the largest dust storms in the United States actually happened in the summer of 1941. There was a wind storm that swept out of Colorado, picked up the dust from the Midwest, and blew it into New York City. If you can go find a video of that one, those are really good because New York City was covered in this right here. I mean, there was a ship taking a video, and it covered. The ship was, I don't know, a couple miles away from the Statue of Liberty, but when the dust hit the Statue of Liberty, all of a sudden you could not see it. Okay? That's how massive this dust storm was that blew across the United States. Now, because the farmers lose everything, because the farm is unproductive, because the banks repossess their farms, because they can't make note payments, you get a lot of these guys who pick up and move, and so you have migration off the farms to either the big cities, or a lot of people moved out to the West Coast, especially California, where there was some farm work. You don't own a farm anymore. You're now basically a migrant worker. Okay? You just pick up everything, load it into whatever kind of car you had. Here we've got some people moving from Oklahoma, and you drive until you get to where you're going, or you run out of gas, or the car breaks down. And you hope you're close enough to a city. Probably the most famous nickname for these people are Okies. Typically people who came from Oklahoma. There's also another group out there, occasionally people refer to them the Arkies, people that moved from Arkansas, that had a lot of farm foreclosures there as well. Now, the effects of all this on people, it's not just financial effects, it also ends up being psychological effects. Think of what we believed before the Depression. Before the Depression, there's this belief in this thing called rugged individualism. Rugged individualism is the idea that you were responsible for yourself, you are responsible for taking care of your family, you are responsible for what is going on in your life. During the 20s, when life is pretty much good, you're a pretty responsible person. You're doing a good job. Now bring that into the Depression. When the employer lays off 25% of the people. Yes, the first people he's going to lay off are the least productive. You cannot classify 25% of your employees as the least productive. At some point, it is just random. At some point, it is, I have to fire you because I let the first 10 guys in the door, and that's all I can afford to keep. But because of that belief in rugged individualism, oh, it must be my fault I'm unemployed. But it's okay. Rugged individualism. I'm going to better myself. I'm going to find a job. I can do this. Now, what do you do when you can't? The reason I lost my job was because I'm less productive. Now I cannot find a job. It must be because I'm not someone they would want to hire. And so this caused this psychological problem among guys who you're supposed to take care of the family and you can't. And it must be your fault. Okay? Add into that pressure of the family. Okay? Guys are We talk a lot about, what do we kind of program women to do during the 1800s, that cult of domesticity. What is it women are supposed to do? We don't really talk about what is it men are supposed to do. Men are supposed to be the breadwinners, and now they're not. You're supposed to be taking care of your family, and now you're not. Okay? There's a reading that we sometimes do in class on what the Depression did to people, and it talks about these guys who went out, they went looking for work, couldn't find it, their wives blamed them. It must be your fault you can't find work. Well, as long as I'm here at the house, let me help you. Again, what do we think about guys and housework? We typically say guys don't know how to do housework because we don't teach them how. Go to the Great Depression and you have guys who don't know how to do housework trying to do it, and they screw it up. So now, not only did you lose your job because you can't keep one, you can't find a job, you can't even help out around the house. It's going to make you feel real good. And so a lot of these people, they felt worthless. They feel hopeless. So what do? Some of them actually took off. Okay? Some of the early relief programs said, here's the deal. If there is somebody in your house that's capable of working, we will not help you. And if you've got a husband or a father at home, he's capable of working. He's a guy. He should be working. As long as he's at home, we're not helping you. So here's a terrible way to actually take care of your family. Leave. Because then they can get relief. Then they can get money. Question number 2. How do you think public displays such as this one affected the unemployed? In this case, we're not talking about the photograph. In this case, we're talking about the billboard. It's kind of a story, which is kind of the story that the photograph is telling. Here you have these guys walking past the sign. And what's the sign say? Jobless men. Keep going. We can't take care of our own people. We're not going to take care of you. So think about that one for a minute. Okay, so real quick, what are some things we see in terms of culture and the Depression? A couple of things, kind of famous things from the Depression. There are photographs from the Depression all over the place because later on the government is going to pay photographers to go around and kind of document the Depression. This photograph is probably the most famous Depression-era photograph. It's by a lady named Dorothea Lange. This is called Migrant Mother. We have this woman, we don't exactly know who she is, but here she is. You can see the look on her face. What are we going to do now? She doesn't know what she's going to do. She's part of those Okies that are headed out. And look, she's got 1, 2, and it gets worse, 3 kids that she's got to take care of, and you can just see on her face she doesn't know what she's going to do next. There are also pieces of literature that are very famous coming out of the Great Depression. Probably the most famous writer is this guy named John Steinbeck. His book, The Grapes of Wrath, he actually went and he lived with these Okies as they moved from Oklahoma. They lost their farm, and he went and lived with a bunch of these people as they moved across the country into California, and documented not only how much they lost, but also how they were taken advantage of as they went along the way. By farmers who were like, look, I don't have a lot of work, but hey, I will pay you 10 cents for every bushel of apples you'll pick. And so you became basically a migrant worker, and then at the end of the day, you picked all these apples, and you walked in, okay, and remember, I'm paying you 5 cents for every bushel you pick. Well, wait a minute, this morning you told me 10. Well, now it's 5. You can take the 5, or you can take nothing. What do you want? It's a terrible, by the end of the book, it's a real downer. Question number 3. What hurt President Hoover's chances of re-election in 1932? Don't just say the Great Depression. There's more to it than that. So in 1932, the Republicans did renominate Hoover. That seems like a really good idea. Why not? He's already made so many people happy. They're naming towns after him. Well, homeless camps, whatever. The Republicans' campaign slogan was, hey, prosperity is right around the corner. Just hang with us for a little bit. It's fine. Just, re-elect the guy. It's okay. He's made himself... He hasn't made himself, just the circumstances have made him the guy that everybody blames. It goes back to that first thing. Blame it on Hoover. He's giving an interview at one point in the early days of the Great Depression, and they're as part of the interview, they brought a photographer and said, well, we just want to get some photos of you around the White House as we do this. And so one photo was of him feeding the dog. Oh, look, President Hoover, just like everybody else, he carries dog treats in his pocket and will feed his dog. The negative reaction from people. Doesn't he understand that people are starving and instead he's feeding his dog? Like he's feeding his dog like Milkbone or something, okay? He's not giving him filet mignon or anything. He's giving him dog food. Okay? People all over the country took care of their pets during the Great Depression. But that just kind of shows you people's mindset about him. It's so much his fault. I can't believe he would feed his own dog like everybody else did. Hoover tried several things. He actually did try, he's not the guy sitting there not doing anything that unfortunately he sometimes gets characterized by. He tried things. He had Congress create this program called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation the government gave loans to businesses, to insurance companies, to banks, these entities that had kind of just barely survived the Depression. And we'll pick on business for the explanation here, kind of the idea of, okay, I'm going to give money to business. Business is then going to spend that money to hire workers. Those people will then be able to spend money on stuff, which will give other businesses more money so they can hire more workers. And the idea behind this was something called prime the pump. Kick some money into the economy to get it moving again. The problem was when they created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, they did not require the businesses to spend the money. So imagine you are a business that has just survived the opening of the Great Depression. You don't know what's going to happen next month. You have nothing in savings anymore. And all of a sudden the government says, here, have some money. What do you do with it? Your answer should be, save it. Because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We may need that for an emergency. Hoover increased public works projects. He actually doubled the amount of money that the government was spending on public works projects. Public works are anything the government creates that is designed for public use. So it can be roads, schools, government buildings, whatever. But again, the government has to pay for these things, so it puts more money in the economy. He doubles that. Okay? He's going to create he's going to start the construction of the largest single public works project in U.S. history up to that point. The creation of the Hoover Dam, which is there right around Las Vegas. Its main purpose, its real purpose, was to give people jobs. Okay? Sure, it provides water. Sure, it provides irrigation. Sure, it provides electricity. But its main purpose was to give people jobs. He doubles the amount of money spent on public works, and it's not enough at all. That's how bad the Depression was. Okay? And so it looks like he's not doing anything. Add to this, in the summer of 1932, there's this thing called the Bonus Expeditionary Force. The Bonus Expeditionary Force were World War I veterans who, during World War I, they had been paid their daily wage as being in the military, but they had not seen that pay go up. Whereas at home, the average worker's wage went up by about $1 a day. And so these guys had argued during the 20s that they deserved a bonus. We put our lives on the line for the country. These basically cowards didn't, and they got a financial benefit out of it. That's not fair. And in the 20s, when life was good, Congress agreed. Congress said, yes, you deserve a bonus. We will give you a bonus. We'll give you an extra $1 for every day you were in the service. It worked out to about $1,000 each. Congress said, though, we're not going to pay it until 1945. Congress is going to wait 20 years before they paid the bonus. And in the 20s, this was a good plan. Imagine you're one of these veterans. You are approximately, by that point, let's just say you're 27 years old. You're going to wait 20 years. They'll be 47. Well, your kids will be out of the house. Most of your big dollar expenses, your house will be paid off. And all of a sudden the government is going to give you basically like 9 months' salary. This is a good deal. Fine, we can wait 20 years. Then the Depression happens. And in the summer of 1932, something like 18,000 of these guys march on Washington, demanding their bonus early. It's not a case of that it would be nice to have it early. It's a case of we have to have it now. We have lost everything. Some people show up and they're like, I've got $5 in my pocket. Once this runs out, I have nothing. So they need it. The House actually voted to give them the bonus. The Senate rejected it. Said, sorry, we can't do that. If we do it for you, we have to do it for everybody else, and we can't do it for everybody else. It's physically and financially impossible. And a lot of the veterans just said, okay, well, okay, we understand. We will wait until next year. We will try again. And in the meantime, they're taking over vacant buildings. They're living in the public parks. It becomes a public health nightmare waiting to happen. And so Congress actually went to President Hoover and said, look, you got to get these guys out of here. And Hoover said, well, there's 18,000 of them. I don't know how to get them out of here. Who can move 18,000 people real quick? Wait a minute, the Army's pretty good at that. Hey, Army, can you move these guys out of here? And the Army said, sure, yeah, absolutely, we can move them. And so this is how they moved them. The Army went in one day and said, okay, you have till noon to leave. And when noon showed up, the Army fired tear gas into the camps. If you can look at these soldiers here, they've got on gas masks. They fired tear gas into the camps. Look at as they're marching through, okay? Here's the rifle. Look right there. Bayonets on the end of the rifles. They didn't charge the veterans, but they did poke them. Hurry up. Move. Get out of here. Right? They come through with flamethrowers. Burn down the Hoovervilles that they have created to make sure they can't come back. So this all looks really awesome in the newspapers. Okay? President Hoover, he feeds his dog rather than people. He hates veterans, obviously. Sadly, during this, there was an infant who had already had some respiratory problems, had been in and out of the hospital, but there's an infant who dies, and the blame becomes that the infant choked to death on the tear gas. So also President Hoover is a baby killer. Well, that's fantastic. While this is all going on, the Democrats are holding their national convention during the bonus march and during the running them out of town. And the Democrats turn around, they nominate this guy named Franklin Roosevelt. Okay? Franklin Roosevelt, who you probably, if you didn't know Teddy Roosevelt, you probably knew this one. Franklin Roosevelt was the governor of New York. He was trying to provide relief for people, and he promised what he called a New Deal for the American people. The idea of we're sitting around a poker table, we deal out the cards, and everybody just kind of looks at him and goes, well, this is crap. And all of a sudden the dealer looks at you and says, you know what, let me take all those back, and let's do this again. Let's see if we can get a better hand, better deal here. What that New Deal is going to involve would be an increased government intervention in the economy. Okay? Way more than what Hoover had done, even though Hoover kind of set the groundwork for it. FDR is going to take it into such a huge, different direction, which is part of the reason Hoover is not given a whole lot of credit for doing anything, because of just comparing him to the guy that comes later. Now, the election of 1932, some people thought it was going to be close. In fact, they did a phone survey about a month before the election. Who are you going to vote for? And they were predicting Hoover to win with about 60% of the popular vote. There's one problem with that survey. It was done by telephone. In 1932, who still has a telephone? People that aren't affected by the Great Depression. People who are still doing just fine. So of course, they're like, I'm not affected. He seems to be the guy that I need to vote for. But whatever. We all know Franklin Roosevelt won, and that's where we're going to pick up in our next unit. Alright, I hope you were able to figure some stuff out from that, and I'll see you guys in class tomorrow. Y'all have a good night.